Good day and welcome to this week's episode of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Donawa, and once again, I am happy to bring the law and you. Of course, you can stream us on the World Wide Web at wesncc.com as well as all social media platforms. So today we have a topic that is often underlooked, and it's called environmental law, the effectiveness of environmental laws in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, you know, we do have legislation, we do have a body. However, is it sufficient? Do we know that climate change is something that is real, global warming is real? And how well are we dealing with sustainable development? Now, I have a guest in studio this morning. Her name is Mrs. Giselle Landeau-Birmingham, and she's a private practitioner. She's an attorney at law, of course, having been admitted to the bar over 10 years ago. Giselle holds a Master of Business Administration in Sustainable Energy Management with distinction from the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business. And she is an adjunct lecturer for climate change issues and environmental impact assessments for energy projects at the Arthur Lockjack. Now, Giselle is a scholarship recipient and has worked at the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions, Legal Aid and Advisory Authority, and the Environmental Management Authority as Corporate Secretary Legal Officer 3. Giselle is also from South, and she is a colleague of mine. So I say good morning, Giselle.
Good morning, Mr. Donawa. Thank you so much for having me this morning.
You could call me Rondell, of course.
Hi, Rondell.
How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thank you
so
much.
So, I mean, you're a private practitioner. You have extensive knowledge in environmental law, as well as you have been past corporate secretary of the EMA.
Yes.
So I believe you are noteworthy and you are qualified to speak on this issue. Now, a lot of people ask, what is environmental law in its simple terms?
Yeah. Rondell, I like this quote. Albert Einstein said that the environment is anything that isn't me. So environmental law is basically that body of law that deals with everything in terms of natural resources, conservation, anything literally that isn't you, the natural environment. That is what environmental law is designed to tackle. Now, environmental law is not simply domestic law. Environmental law, a lot of it is made at the international level through multilateral environmental agreements, and then that has to be incorporated into our domestic law. So it happens both at the international level as well as the domestic level, and that is essentially dealing with all aspects of the environment.
Now, are we signed on to any charter in terms of environmental policies?
We're signed on to a number of multilateral environmental agreements and conventions. For example, if we are dealing with climate change, we have signed on to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We've signed on to the Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol, all of those things, in addition to which there's, I believe, over 200 international conventions which deal with environmental law, and we are signatory to many of those.
And in terms of our legal framework in Trinidad and Tobago, what are our legislation that we are governed by?
Well, essentially, we're governed by the Environmental Management Act when we deal with environmental issues in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the Environmental Management Authority was created as a sort of coordinating body to deal with all environmental related matters. It is not the only agency in Trinidad and Tobago that deals with environmental issues. For example, we have Forestry Division that will deal with forests. We have the Multilateral Environmental Unit of the Ministry. We have IMA, which is the Institute of Marine Affairs, so they would deal with certain things. But the Environmental Management Authority is the authority created with jurisdiction to coordinate, facilitate, and oversee all environmental management in Trinidad and Tobago. And they've been set up under the enabling legislation, which is the Environmental Management Act.
And of course, they have also functions and powers, not in terms of creating law, but they are a creature of statute.
They are a creature of statute, which means that essentially, since a law created them, they're bound by the four corners of that law, and any decision that they take must be in accordance with that law. Yes, they have functions and powers which are stipulated under the Act. So, for example, one of the major functions of the Environmental Management Authority is that they must make recommendations for the National Environmental Policy. Now, the National Environmental Policy is sort of an umbrella strategic framework for environmental management in Trinidad and Tobago, and the EMA is empowered, or it's one of their functions, to make recommendations to the minister in relation to the National Environmental Policy. In addition to that, they are tasked with developing programs and policies for sound environmental management and wise use of the environment within Trinidad and Tobago. They're responsible for education and creating awareness about environmental management. They're also responsible for creating standards and criteria for environmental management within Trinidad and Tobago. So, for example, we know, like the Bureau of Standards. The Bureau of Standards will develop criteria and standards for just about anything that we use. However, in relation to the environment, it is the EMA that does that. And they're also responsible for dealing with pollution. So anything with pollution prevention or control, yes, they're responsible for that. They're responsible for dealing with certain conservation efforts, such as designating environmentally sensitive areas and environmentally sensitive species, and ensuring that those things are protected. So all of those things fall within the scope of their functions. Yeah. And in terms of their powers, well, they're authorized by the Act to do anything which enables them to carry out their functions.
Understood. Now, Giselle, let's take a break and we'll be right back. You're watching sure. WESN Content Capital.
Thank you.
Everyone has a dream, a vision of what we want. The things that make us happy and help us make others happy. Let First Citizens help you paint a brighter future. A new home. A new car. A new day of living stress-free. Make the things you picture a reality.
Visit us at firstcitizenstt.com or email loans@firstcitizenstt.com. First Citizens, we put you first.
Gift giving during a lockdown can still be hassle-free with a gift from FanZone with delivery options available nationwide. Visit and browse our Facebook and Instagram pages for all your official licensed merchandise and apparel and have it delivered to your door. Find us on Facebook and Instagram. FanZone, we've got you covered.
And welcome back. We are speaking to Mrs. Giselle Landeau-Birmingham, attorney at law, speaking about the environment. Now, we were speaking about earlier, Giselle, the powers of under the EM Act.
Yes.
And of course, we have a body that deals with that deals with anything with relations to applications, appeals, complaints with respect to environmental issues.
Well, we do. So, like I said, the Environmental Management Act, it created the Environmental Management Authority, which is responsible for all the decisions and actions in relation to the environment. Now, when they make a decision or determination, that decision or determination or whatever action they take can be appealed to the Environmental Commission. So the Environmental Commission is actually a specialist tribunal set up to deal with appeals from the Environmental Management Authority. Now, the Environmental Commission, it is a superior court of record, and it is a specialist court. So we know the specialist courts, for example, like the Family Court, the Children's Court, yes, etc. Now, this commission is set up specifically to deal with environmental issues. And usually you have a chairman and a deputy chairman who are attorneys at law. They must be more than 10 years standing. And then you have other persons who are part of that commission who have a background in engineering, natural science, etc. So that's where the specialist quality of the court comes in.
Yes, and in terms of caseload, is it that it's just akin to Trinidad and Tobago, or do they have jurisdiction over other Caribbean islands?
No, because it's set up in such a way that it is, again, a creature of statute. It is created by an enabling piece of legislation, which is the Environmental Management Act. It only applies to Trinidad and Tobago, and it is, again, bound by the Act, although as a superior court of record, it has inherent jurisdiction like any other superior court.
Right. And of course, in terms of the environment, I know we have a lot of legislation, powers, functions, but is it actually working? Because we continually face challenges with respect to social and economic progress in terms of environmental sustainability.
Yeah.
Now, how are we dealing with these challenges? Yes, we have the act, but how are we dealing with noise pollution, deforestation, climate change, you know?
I think in order to understand why it is the way it is, first you need to understand that, again, the EMA is a creature of statute, and the manner that certain things go to the EMA is through complaints, right? So the system is a bit reactive in the sense that usually when a complaint is made, then the process starts. Right? So it is always or usually triggered by someone making a complaint about something rather than the more proactive approach that we go out and we address these concerns and we address these issues in a holistic manner. But again, that's because of how the system is set up, right? I don't know if we could say that there's some serious concerns that need to be addressed. But again, in order for some of these concerns to be addressed, the legislation itself might have to be amended.
So therefore, really and truly, as I said, you are a creature of statutes, and they can only have powers within their remit.
Yes, that is so.
And so therefore, when we have policies with respect to just on a wider scale, noise pollution,
right,
water pollution as well, even let's touch with the climate change issues. Right? I mean, it is global.
Right.
So from your knowledge, how are we moving towards that sort of sustainable energy? Let's look at it, or renewable energy, although there has been talks about it.
Yeah. Well, you see, climate change is a multi-level approach that has to be adopted to climate change. And at the higher levels, it is apparent that we are dealing with climate change, and we are making strides in relation to dealing with these significant issues. For example, the government we've signed on to the conventions, we are doing the monitoring, we are ensuring that the inventories are being done in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, etc. We have set strategic plans and goals in relation to emissions reductions and meeting our emissions reductions targets. We set strategies, for example, for the transportation sector in terms of the shift away from the traditional types of fuel towards CNG, stuff like that. However, it requires a multi-level approach. So at the highest levels, we are doing all these things. I think what happens is sometimes it doesn't translate to the other persons at different levels within the system, because a multi-stakeholder approach that is required. For most persons, when you speak about issues like climate change, sustainable energy management, sustainable development, they do not understand how the concept applies to them. So even though we have the broad policies, until persons understand what they can do and how they can contribute to making the system better, they just don't see the issues as real, tangible issues. What I like to tell people is climate change disproportionately affects us as Trinidad and Tobago because we're a small island developing state, we're a coastal state. And of course, if you've noticed the change in the weather patterns, right? We have things like longer drought periods, which affects each of us because then you can't get water, drinking water. Sometimes you turn on your pipe, there's no water in your pipe. So it affects you personally. When we have hurricanes and storms, we have floods. Again, it affects you personally. When we have coastal erosion, some of the beaches we can no longer go to. Again, that affects you personally. So when people start seeing it at that level, they understand that, okay, yes, there is something that I can do and I can also make a contribution. And that's how we really need to do more, maybe to marry all the stakeholders and to adopt a multi-level approach in dealing with these issues.
Now multi-level approach. Now let's deal with the dump, which falls under swim curl. Now, isn't there ways to dispose of waste? Because I think in 21st century, having we call a labas, in various areas that is not environmental friendly or close to communities. How can we, I mean, I've heard so many talks about that, but what are we doing there?
Yeah. I know, for example, that from the Environmental Management Authority's perspective, they would be tasked with dealing with waste, both hazardous and non-hazardous waste. Again, yes, the landfills fall under swim call. And I think what has happened over the years is that we're over capacity with the landfills, which creates issues that we just have not really delved into dealing with all of the issues. Maybe it's a capacity issue in terms of what are the alternatives, and even if there are alternatives, how soon can we get these alternatives off the ground, right? In addition to which, we kind of accustomed to the system the way it is, and as with anything else, to change the way we do things, it takes a lot more doing initially, right? You also need the buy-in of the public to have certain things done. So for example, when we think about the landfill, we only think about maybe the stench, the inconvenience, those things. But remember, there's also livelihoods tied to the landfill sites, right? Persons, these scavengers who are there, that is their livelihood, that is how they live. So when we deal with these issues, we have to look at everyone that is affected and put things in place to ensure that when we address one issue, we don't create something else that we didn't intend to create. We have to address it across the board, and we have to bring all the stakeholders on board to be able to get the desired result.
And let's deal with recycling. I mean, I've seen, I studied in the UK over 10 years ago, and during that time recycling, I mean, it was a big issue, including using your recyclable items to transfer into renewable energy if it's via energy, to get electricity, etc., because they are big on that. In terms of our recycling laws, do we have recycling laws, or is it something of a national policy that you know about?
I do not, and this is just in my opinion, as far as I recall, we don't have a specific law that deals with recycling, but we have programs and policies in place to deal with recycling. We have projects in place to deal with recycling. So for example, the iCare project is a big project which dealt with recycling in terms of Tetra packs, and so like all those orchard packs that you would get, or milk packs, those cartons can be recycled, your plastic bottles, etc., can be recycled. But then where does it go? Because if everyone is not in adapting that program, then what happens? And that is one of the issues. Where does it go? I assume that there are things in place, because you can't have a project on one end and not something on the other end. In addition to which, usually when you have projects, remember, projects have a fixed lifespan. So once you have that public buy-in, initially you want something to come into place that takes over when the project ends and actually continues. So this should be a norm. This should be how we normally do things, right? And so I'm not certain in relation to when those projects end, what happened, or if it's just isolated projects and it's for a particular duration, and when the duration ends, that is it. And of course, that needs to be a national policy where everyone, even your garbage, you have to separate your garbage. In other countries, plastics, waste, but it's a work in progress. It is. And it requires buy-in, and it requires persons taking individual responsibility, because I do a lot of these things. I compost, I try to recycle, reuse some of the containers, those things. I take that in terms of my personal responsibility to contribute to a better society for all of us. But again, people need education, they need awareness, and they need to buy into these things. Indeed. We have to take another break. We'll be right back. You are watching WASN Strictly Legal.
Everyone has a dream, a vision of what we want. The things that make us happy and help us make others happy. Let First Citizens help you paint a brighter future. A new home. A new car. A new day of living stress-free. Make the things you picture a reality.
Visit us at firstcitizenstt.com or email loans@firstcitizenstt.com. First Citizens, we put you first.
It may seem like the hardest thing to do right now, but we all need each other to wear a mask, wash our hands, watch our physical distance, and stay at home. We need you safe. Together we can make the difference. Together we can curb the spread of COVID-19. So let's be responsible in our actions. The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
And welcome back. Speaking about environmental laws and its effectiveness in Trinidad and Tobago, Mrs. Landeau-Birmingham, let's talk about Certificate of Environmental Clearance, or CEC. We hear it a lot of times. I don't think a lot of people know about it. So what is a CEC?
A CEC is a Certificate of Environmental Clearance, essentially under the Environmental Management Act. The minister may designate activities which you require almost like a permit to be able to conduct these activities. And the minister has designated, I think it's 44 or something like that, activities which range from anything which involves maybe food production, farming, including poultry farming, husbandry, anything that deals with maybe the petrochemicals sector, things that deal with water. So for example, if you have a facility for the treatment of water, or you want to open a plant maybe to bottle water, those things you will require a CEC for those things. You require a CEC for certain construction projects. If you have to excavate or grade land, you may require a CEC. So
what is the reason for requiring a CEC, right, and how well it's managed?
So essentially, the reason you require a CEC is that these activities, all of these activities, they have significant environmental impacts. So the purpose of making you apply for a CEC is that the EMA can consider, okay, you are making this application, you want to carry out this activity. There's going to be, it's very likely that there's going to be these environmental impacts as a result of your activity. How do we mitigate these impacts? Yeah. Because remember, the government is committed to sustainable development, and sustainable development is really about marrying economic development, social development, and the environment. So it's not about stopping people from having this economic activity. It is about doing it in a manner which is sustainable. And the CEC is one of the tools under the legislation to allow that to be done. So we allow you to do the activity, or EMA, I should say, allows you to do the activity. However, in order for you to carry out the activity, you must adhere to certain conditions and stipulations under this permit, which is called a CEC.
But in terms of practicality,
right?
How does the authority or whomever is in charge police or rather enforce whatever construction or works? Because I'm sure there are a lot of persons within this country who does these types of activities and are not even getting a clearance, or not even applying for such a clearance.
Yes,
that's the word, applying.
I think that is the issue. And again, it comes back to the approach, right? If, for example, I am doing a construction project on my land, I have never heard about a CEC. I do not know what is a CEC. It's my land, my money, my construction project. I do not feel that is necessary for me to do these things. In addition to which, I may have never even heard about it, right? And the usual way that comes to the EMA is through maybe the neighbor complaining about the noise from the construction, or the fact that I'm grading down the land and coming too close to their boundary, and they become concerned, and then they start reaching out to the authorities. So it is more reactive in the sense that then an investigation is launched, and then it is discovered that I do not have a CEC for the particular activity, etc. And then the process in terms of the enforcement process then starts in terms of a notice of violation being issued against me because I did not apply for the CEC and receive it before I started the activity. I think what is required is maybe a broader approach, so that there needs to be some linkages along the way. If you are taking, for example, a loan from the bank for a business or from ADB for developing an agricultural parcel, or you are registering a company or something like that, there should be a flag that, okay, you need certain permits, you need certain regulatory approvals. A CC is one of those, right? If you, for example, if you're purchasing property or selling property, or you want to develop your property, you may require approval from tongue and country. So then when you go for your tongue and country approval, there should be a flag there again that tells you, okay, you might be able to get your tongue and country approval, but you also need a CEC from EMA. So there needs to be that linkage in terms of getting people more aware of what is required.
And in the enforcement tools as well. And of course, it comes to my next point with respect to noise pollution. I would have stated another program where there was a recent High Court ruling with respect to how the authorities' procedure as it pertains to shutting down FETs. In that instance, it was tailgate FET, whereby they would have been under the noise pollution rules, where certain powers or certain things has to be followed if someone is constantly not complying with the noise variation, and that wasn't done. Could you just share some light on how it got to that point and what can be done?
Well, you see, that's one of the concerns, because I read the judgment, and I mean, the court was very clear. There's nothing further that I could say in relation to that particular case, which is the Wild Goose case I think you're talking about, right?
Yes.
The court was very clear that the EMA acted outside of its power. And again, it comes back to this idea that this is a statutory authority created by a particular piece of legislation, and it cannot act outside of that. Go ahead. So
therefore, it means that a lot of promoters can decide, well, if they are within time to sue the state or sue the EMA, because we have seen, I have been part of a promotion company where you've seen where constantly the officials of the EMA constantly tells you or threatens to shut down your FET in tandem with the police, and has to be done, right? And then not knowing that you have to go through a procedure of not writing the minister, but you must give a notice, You must give a notice. So you have to give a notice. You have to have the promoter time to respond. So how can you do that within the time frame of a FET?
Well, as the court pointed out, there's no power to shut down the event just like that. Of course, the EMA has certain options. For example, they can seek an injunction. They could seek an order, for example, for the closure of a facility. But in terms of the time frame of a FET, which is a few hours, I can't see that being a possibility, or practically speaking, being something that is applicable. So I think what is necessary, again, and the legislation provides for this, is that there must be some sort of consensus building, and there must be some sort of involvement of the stakeholders in terms of coming to some acceptance that this is what is permissible and this is what is not.
Or regulations being changed.
Or, again,
exactly,
because this is, again, a statutory authority which is created by a piece of enabling legislation. So if the issue is the legislation, then fix the legislation.
Indeed. Any closing comments with respect to the environment? I know we are out of time, clearly.
I'm very happy that we did this segment. I think the environment is a bit underappreciated. I know that there are some challenges in terms of the enforcement procedure. However, I think that this is a good step to have these conversations. It's even a good thing sometimes when the court tells you what you can and cannot do, because then it clarifies exactly what is the rules. It clarifies what can be done and what cannot be done, and then you have to now come up with a strategy as to, well, how do we move from point A to point B? So I'm happy that these conversations are happening. And again, thank you. Yes, I really think so.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Landeau-Birmingham, and all the best to you. We are grateful, indeed.
Thank you very much.
So it's a wrap. You have been watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Donawa. We were here with Mrs. Giselle Landeau-Birmingham, attorney at law. Do have a great week. God bless.